What is up everyone, Hero276 here and welcome to today's video and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be featuring the new Psycho Cut GALLADE in the Open Great League. I have a shiny GALLADE that I recently evolved. It's not the best rank whatsoever, but it was one that I had readily available and it's shiny, so that kind of incentivized me to evolve it. This GALLADE has access to the brand new move of Psycho Cut, which gives GALLADE lightning fast energy generation and allows it to access its hard-hitting charge moves a lot quicker. For the moveset, it's going to be obviously Psycho Cut with Leaf Blade and Close Combat. So this GALLADE did very well for me. I paired it up with a Shadow Drapion on the lead and a Deoxys Defense, kind of forming an ABB style team, Dark Double Psychic, so it did very well for me. I went 10-5 with this team, and you're going to see 2 4-1 sets. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, but before we dive right into it, I just want to give a special shout out to my Spotify page. If you're enjoying the music used in this video and other videos, please consider checking out my Spotify page. It's a great way to help support the channel. You can just buy my albums there for $4.99 each, or you can follow the page. You don't have to spend any money, and you still get updates on all my music when they're released. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And we will start today's video leading Shadow Drapion into Alola Ninetales. Now, Shadow Drapion does have access to Sludge Bomb. I'm not running it, but my opponent does not know that. So we're just going to bait here, farm up to the potential Sludge Bomb, and I'm going to bait here with the Aqua Tail. My opponent commits a shield, and I'm perfectly okay with this. Now I'm going to go for another Aqua Tail. I think I can make 3, so I'm going to go for the Aqua Tail. My opponent double shields, and I'm going to make a third Aqua Tail right here. Aqua Tail will do some solid damage onto the Alola Ninetales, and from here, Shadow Drapion does get KO'd, but it sets up the 0 shield for GALLADE. So I'm going to come in with the Deoxys defense. What it's going to look to do is absorb the energy here in this matchup. Weather Ball not going to be doing a ton of damage, and the charms would obviously hit GALLADE for super effective. So from here, I'm just going to farm down. My opponent sends in a Greninja. I'm going to go for the Rock Slide. I don't have Thunderbolt, which would one-shot. Rock Slide still does a tremendous amount of damage. From here, I'm just going to look to absorb the energy on Deoxys defense. That's the primary goal of this Pokemon. And from here, I get it down to about 1 HP, and I look to Psycho Cut farm down. I do shield up the move, as GALLADE doesn't take hits from Greninja very well, and in the back, my opponent is running Skarmory. So all I need to do here is make the back-to-back Close Combats, and despite the type disadvantage, Close Combat number 1 is going to do some very solid damage, and we're going to be able to win this game here, as Close Combat number 2 will pick up the knockout and take the win. Hopping into game number 2, picking up a lead up against Medicham, another fighting and psychic type Pokemon, but not the one that we're featuring in today's video. Haven't really seen Medicham in quite a while. My opponent attempts a Psycho Boost catch onto a Carbink, but I do not fall for the catch. I'm just going to go straight Rock Slide here. This is a losing matchup for Deoxys defense, as we don't hit nearly hard enough for the bulky Carbink, and their Rock Throws actually do more damage because of Stab. So from here, I'm just going to look to commit no shields in this matchup, so my opponent will be firing off a charge move. Rock Slide does not KO from this health range. Like I said, Deoxys defense's job is to be a primary sponge of energy. I do win CMP on the Psycho Boost. It is not enough to KO, and that is very unfortunate. But from here, I can just let this move go through. I'm going to send in the Shadow Drapion and look to get ahead on energy for the Medicham that awaits me. So my opponent is going to fire off some moves. It's a power-up punch, not going to do a ton of damage there, but the subsequent counters afterwards will. I'm going to go for the Crunch. This will hit quite hard onto the Medicham, not enough to KO, but it is enough to 2-shot. So my opponent going to be firing off another power-up punch. Again, the goal of the other 2 Pokemon is to absorb energy that would otherwise hit very hard onto the Glassy GALLADE. Going to go for the Crunch. Crunch here is going to pick up a shield, and we are in business. Going to send in the GALLADE, and the speed of GALLADE allows me to outpace the Medicham and get off this Leaf Blade, which forces the second shield. And from here, I can shield myself. My opponent full sends the Psychic. That would have done a lot of damage as it was boosted, and I'm going to be able to get to another Leaf Blade here. This will safely KO the Medicham, and GALLADE will be facing a Talonflame in the back. And I'm going to go for the Close Combat here, as Close Combat does more than a double resisted Leaf Blade. Both charge moves are resisted, but Close Combat is not enough to KO, and as you're going to see, this move is going to KO through the shield because I am at 1 HP, and I take the loss. Hopping into game number 3, picking up a lead up against Registeel. This is not a great lead for Drapion, so what I'm going to look to do is stay in and throw the crunch and look for the Focus Blast catch onto my Deoxys defense. Like I said, the goal of the Deoxys defense is to sponge energy from harder hitting moves. I unfortunately do not get the catch, but my opponent fires off their energy anyways. They go for the Zap Cannon. Zap Cannon does produce the attack debuff, and then they send in Lucario, and my opponent surrenders, and that is game, set, and match. Hopping into the next match, picking up a lead up against Umbreon. Now, Umbreon isn't a bad lead by any stretch. It would definitely be better if I had Sludge Bomb, but it's still not that terrible of a lead for Drapion. My opponent is going to fire off their energy. It is going to be the foul play, and that is very heavily resisted by this Drapion. I'm throwing the Aqua Tail here, baiting the Sludge Bomb. Opponent does commit the shield, and that's honestly all I can hope for in this matchup. Gonna go for another Aqua Tail. Opponent lets that one go through. Doesn't do too much damage as you see, but without pacing and doing similar damage to a foul play, I honestly don't think it's that bad of a matchup for Drapion, like I said. So I'm gonna overfarm here. My opponent tries to catch onto an Alolan Sandslash. It is the Powder Snow variant, so I decide to send in Deoxys defense rather than stay in. So these counters here hitting for double super effective damage as well. They're still running Bulldoze on the Alolan Sandslash as opposed to the newly updated Drill Run, and that's going to allow me to get in a very heavy counter farm down, as Ice Punch will not KO, and I leave with residual energy, forcing the Umbreon to throw. I actually decide to shield here because I want to get off a couple of counters worth of damage before going down. I decide to fire off the Rock Slide. Rock Slide not going to do too much damage, but it's more so the counters that I'm more concerned about. The counters here are going to hit Umbreon for super effective damage. Rock Slide gets it low, forcing the Umbreon to throw their energy, and from here, I'm going to bring in the Shadow Drapion. Shadow Drapion is not in foul play range, so I'm going to go for this Aqua Tail. Aqua Tail here, going to KO the Umbreon, and what's in back? They have an electric type. I did not see what it was. It's actually an Electabuzz. Very interesting for my opponent. They shield up my Aqua Tail bait. Gonna go for the Crunch. Crunch will do some very solid damage onto the Electabuzz and against the defense debuff. So at this point, I just win. All I need to do is shield up this charge move. It is the Thunder. That would have easily KO'd. So now I can go for the close combat. It is overkill. I could have gone for the Leaf Blade with the lower defense, but I just wanted to show that I have it, and we take the win. Hopping into the final game of this set, picking up an excellent lead into Skeledirge. Skeledirge takes super effective damage from both of my charge moves. The Incinerates do add up, but my pacing advantage is very significant. Gonna go for the Crunch. Crunch here would threaten a knockout, so the opponent elects to commit their shield, and I'm able to outpace here, making an Aqua Tail. Let's see if my opponent was counting. They were not. They shielded up. Aqua Tail would not have KO'd, so from here, I'm actually just going to shield the Drapion. My opponent's actually running Crunch, and they get a debuff. So now I have to commit a second shield, as a Crunch here would threaten the knockout. They go for another Crunch. I get another defense debuff, but it doesn't matter because I do end up making it to the Crunch. So my Crunch KOs the Skeledirge. What's in back? It's a Azumarill, and I don't have access to Sludge Bomb here. So I decide to go for Aqua Tail, as I would not have made it to the Crunch. And what I'm going to look to do instead of sending the Gallade is send in the Deoxys defense. I don't have any shields, so I can't shield up the potential play rough that would land on the Gallade, so I have to come in with Deoxys defense to absorb the energy. Once I know that Azumarill is basically dry on energy, I'm going to look to switch out of the matchup and outpace to a Leaf Blade. My opponent decides to fire off another charge move, and that's perfectly fine by me. Once I know they're dry, I'm going to pivot out of the matchup into the Gallade, look to charge up to a Leaf Blade, overfarm, make sure that they throw the bubble first, and go for the Leaf Blade. Leaf Blade will secure the knockout onto Azumarill, and in the back, it's a Venusaur. So the Psycho Cat's hit for super effective damage. Unfortunately, not much else does. I'm going to go for the close combat. It is resisted, but it still does over half of their health. Gallade hits extremely hard, even in the non-shadow. Venusaur KOs with the Frenzy Plant, and I have the move banked on Deoxys defense. Psycho Boost is going to KO from this health range, and we take the win. And just a brief intermission as we claim our set rewards. We ended up going 4-1 like I said. We have another 4-1 set coming up, so let's hop into those battles. Hopping into the first match of set number 2, picking up a lead into Talonflame, and this is where access to Aqua Tail is very handy. My opponent's going to pivot out of the matchup into Empoleon, and I send in Deoxys Defense with access to counter. So my opponent is running the new move of Steel Wing. They're going to give it a try. I can survive a Hydro Cannon from this health range. I build up to the Thunderbolt. I do not have it, but I'm going to bait like I do. My opponent shields up the Rock Slide, and from here, I'm in the even shields, so whatever they do, I'm doing as well. Since I am running an ABB style team, they shield, I shield, and Deoxys Defense barely survives the Steel Wings and is able to counter down. Now, because I showed Rock Slide, my opponent cannot send in the Talonflame, so they're likely going to be sending in their third, and it is a Shadow Whiscash. So what I'm going to look to do is send in the Gallade. Gallade here with access to Leaf Blade, hitting for double super effective damage, will be forcing a shield here from the Shadow Whiscash. I'm going to be shielding myself as I can outpace to another Leaf Blade. Opponent goes for the Scald. We do not see the attack debuff. My opponent tries to catch the Leaf Blade onto Talonflame, but bad news for them, I anticipated the catch, and I switch into my Drapion, which has access to Aqua Tail. Opponent will be able to slightly outpace here, and this is a Shadow Drapion, so any move from this health range is going to KO. It is the Fly. I decide to send in the Gallade. I'm going to overfarm on a bunch of energy. Leaf Blade is double resisted, but it should KO the Talonflame from this health range, and back in comes the Whiscash, but they're not going to be able to survive a Leaf Blade. Leaf Blade will KO the Whiscash, and we take the win. Hopping into the next one, picking up a lead into Registeel. I'm going to go forward with the same game plan as last time. I'm going to look to connect with the Crunch, but my opponent actually switches out into Shadow Dragonair. I'm going to go here for the Crunch. Crunch would do a lot of damage. My opponent lets it go through, and I send in the Deoxys Defense. I can survive a charge move from this range, so I'm not too concerned about letting a charge move go through. My opponent able to connect with the Body Slam, but we safely get a counter farm down. My opponent sends in the Feraligatr, and I do lose the charged attack priority, and that's very unfortunate for me, as I lose all of this energy. I let the charge move go through. I send in the Drapion, but Drapion, not much better of a matchup, as we do again lose the charged attack priority. My opponent goes for the Hydro Cannon. I'm forced to burn a shield. I know that Gallade in the back is not going to want to deal with the Shadow Claws. Opponent lets the Crunch go through, and they're looking to put this game on the shoulders of a 2-shielded Registeel, but bad news for my opponent. After I get my opponent's first shield, Gallade will be in business. My opponent's going to have to expend their energy, and I'm going to let this one go through, and I'm going to let Gallade do its thing. Because we are the non-shadow, this close combat is not going to one-shot from this range. I'm going to have to get to 3 moves here, unless my opponent decides to call a bait, which they do, and this game is over, as I'm going to be able to connect here with the Leaf Blade. My opponent comes to the realization that they can no longer win this game, so they decide to surrender the match. Hopping into the next one, picking up a lead into Shadow Feraligatr. This is kind of dangerous, as the Shadow Claws hit hard on my backline, and Hydro Cannon threatens a knockout on Shadow Drapion. So in order to win this matchup, I have to successfully bait. So I shield up the Hydro Cannon, and hopefully this gives them the inclination to shield up my Aqua Tail. So my opponent shields up my bait, and now we are in the driver's seat of this matchup. This allows me to outpace here to the subsequent Crunches. Crunch will hit quite hard onto the Shadow Feraligatr. My opponent forced to expend energy, as I would have been able to get in a farm down. My opponent goes for the Hydro Cannon, and I send in Gallade, and Gallade gets a 2 Psycho Cut head start. My opponent sends in Cresselia, but we are up energy here in this matchup. Gonna go for the Leaf Blade. It's not gonna do a ton of damage, but I'm able to get to 2 before they make it to the Moonblast. And from here, I'm hoping that I can send in the Deoxys Defense on the CMP to the Moonblast. I do not get the catch, but they end up throwing their energy anyways. My opponent ends up going for the Grass Knot, but that's perfectly okay by me, as it does not do a lot of damage. Gonna no shield here once again. Even a Moonblast would not do a lot of damage, but my opponent's just gonna go straight Grass Knot. They are either running Future Sight or just don't want to go for the Moonblast for whatever reason. I don't really know, so I'm just gonna look to stay in here. Opponent's firing off yet another charge move. Is it the Grass Knot? My opponent does full send the Grass Knot, and they have Registeel in the back. And Registeel is basically a sitting duck in the back line. I'm going to be able to connect here with the Psycho Boost, and because of the chip damage, maybe that means that Gallade can one-shot the Registeel. My opponent's going to go for a charge move. I shield up the Zap Cannon, and Registeel is at minimum 10 turns away from their next charge move, which means I can safely throw the back-to-back close combat, is going to force the shield, but I have another one stored and I win the CMP tie. Gallade's going to be able to KO the Registeel with this close combat. It's just the Cresselia in the back, my opponent surrenders, and that is game, set, and match. Hopping into the penultimate match, picking up a lead into Decidueye. This is a great lead for the Drapion. My opponent switches into the Feraligatr. I'm going to bank a crunch and pivot into the Deoxys defense. I'm going to commit the shield as I can survive one charge move, but I want to entice my opponent to give up their shields first. So what I'm going to look to do is build up to the Rock Slide, but unfortunately I lose CMP. I let the move go through. It is a Hydro Cannon. Maybe they're not running Crunch. Maybe they're running Ice Beam instead. I go for the Rock Slide. Rock Slide going to be shielded by my opponent, and from here, I do get Shadow Clawed farmed down, and this is really not looking too good. I'm going to send back in the Drapion, as Drapion does at least have somewhat of a resistance to the Shadow Claws, but unfortunately, it's not looking too good if they shield up my Crunch, which they decide to do. They recognize I am soft to a Feraligatr in the back, which I am with my Gallade, so I decide to shield up the Hydro Cannon. At the very least here, I am going to be able to outpace to the Crunch, and my opponent will get taken out here, but they could just send in their third. It's Empoleon, and not winning alignment definitely hurt me in this situation. If I was able to win alignment, I would have the Gallade aligned onto the Empoleon, and I would have the Decidueye lined up against my Drapion, but I'm not able to do that, and my opponent, knowing that, can send in their Decidueye, which fully walls the moveset of this Gallade. I try to go for CMP, but my opponent overfarms on the Magical Leaf. Good decision by them. That's going to allow my opponent to outpace, and unfortunately I just lose here. I'm going to be taken out by this charge move. It is the Spirit Shackle. I send in the Drapion, but Drapion can get easily KO'd by a Frenzy Plant, and I just got swept by a Decidueye. But you know we have to end it on a positive note, picking up a lead into Annihilate. Not a great lead for me, but I am going to stay in here and at least threaten with the Crunch as I do outpace. So I'm going to go here for the Crunch. Crunch is going to be shielded by my opponent, and unless my opponent is running Ice Punch, I actually do resist all of the energy here from this Annihilate. It's just the counters that do a lot of damage. My opponent is running Ice Punch, but I barely survive and get off the Crunch. Crunch is going to do a lot of damage, so my opponent does decide to shield it up, but because they're running Ice Punch, I can send in the Deoxys defense. They won't be able to make it to a Shadow Ball, and I can fire off the Psycho Boost immediately, giving us the one-shot. My opponent's going to contemplate what to do. I send in Gallade to the Resumerill. My opponent tries to catch the Leaf Blade onto their Talonflame, but they are unsuccessful. Now, despite our charge moveset being resisted, close combat is enough to two-shot the Talonflame. So what I'm going to look to do is fire off the back-to-back close combats, knocking out the Talonflame, and the hope here is that I survive the bubbles. Bubbles do so much damage now that my defense is lowered, but I do outpace, making it to the Leaf Blade. And this is just a win here, as Azumarill is too low to do much of anything to the Deoxys. I also still have two shields to hide behind. I shield up. It's the Ice Beam. I was afraid of a Hydro Pump. My opponent throws after one bubble. I know that this is just the Ice Beam. I can survive it from this health range, so a very easy no shield for me. And now I have the double Psycho Boosts ready to go. Psycho Boost number 1 is going to get this Azumarill into a range where Psycho Boost number 2 will pick up the knockout and secure us the win. And that's going to put a wrap on this one, but as I decide to claim my set rewards, I'm going to go over Gallade's performance. Overall, I felt that Gallade was an extremely solid addition thanks to Psycho Cut, and now, thanks to its speed, it is one of the deadliest closers in the Great League. I'm also very curious to see how Ultra League Premier Gallade will perform. I already have an Ultra League Gallade built, and I did TM away Confusion to get the new Psycho Cut, so I'm very excited to see how that's going to be. I think it'll be very similar style to how it operates in the Great League, a super high energy closer, but that's a different topic for another video. I would have absolutely loved to try out the Shadow version of Gallade, but I don't have Shadow Gallade, so I just invested in a shiny that I had saved from Community Day. But on the whole, Gallade is vastly improved. I definitely would recommend the Shadow over the regular, if you can do it. Unfortunately, I know not everyone can, so the regular is just as serviceable too. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.